FilthyRobot here, just about to start the breakdown of the Baldur Gate 3 classes, and wanted to remind you all that we do not have complete information for this quite yet. A number of these classes are in the game, but only up to level 5 as part of early access, and a number of these classes are not, or subclasses rather, are not yet in the game at all. So the information I'm going to provide to you guys is a little bit of data mine stuff collected on websites, a little bit of my own D&D knowledge going into this, a little bit of previous subclasses, and a little bit of the information released on the games. What this means is some of these things are going to be a little bit inaccurate. Some things that are reported as an action might be a bonus reaction. Some of the things that happen in normal mechanics of D&D may not apply to the Baldur's Gate 3 game. They may have tweaked these engines a little bit. Where I notice these differences or where I can see them, I'm going to try to highlight them. And when I think these are going to have implications on how the character plays, I'm going to mention that. But just a caveat that not all of this information will be exactly accurate because of the sources that we're drawing from. Let's take a look at the Bard in Baldur's Gate 3. So, going to give us 3 subclasses to start with: Lore, Valor, and Swords. More on those a little bit later. The Bard as a general chassis is a squishy spellcaster with limited access to both weapons. So here, simple weapons, hand crossbows, long swords, rapiers, and short swords. No access to shields, and full caster progression, which means like the wizard, sorcerer, druid, and cleric, they have full progression, not half progression. So this is at 1, 3, 5, 7, etc. They get the next level of spells and the spell progression associated with that. They are almost always charisma based and tend to also emphasize charming, control-y kind of spells like that. Here, let's see, Dex and Charisma saving throw proficiencies, neither of which tend to be super great. Dex saves are really good at avoiding AoE damage, and a limited number of status effects, and Charisma tends to be a pretty rare saving throw proficiency, but still can be useful occasionally when this comes up. Bards get their subclass features at 3, which makes them a little bit tricky to multi-spec, as you have to go a lot of points deep into Bard to get the Bard benefits. However, if you are a Bard and want to splash another class as part of multi-classing, your Bard features will only be delayed by 1 round if you can get a class that has subclass features coming in at 1, for example. Generally, you see Bards built as backliners, generally controlling and often the face of the party. They have really excellent skill progression. I guess maybe we can break that down a little bit here as we talk through this. Bardic Inspiration is an ability that all Bards get that allows them to basically give a dice to buff allies at the allies' impetus later. So does the ally need a better attack roll? Well, they have that Bardic Inspiration dice they banked until they want to use it. They want a better save throw, this type of thing. Song of Rest makes your your recovery dice better when you're healing on short or long rest, which is pretty solid. Jack of all trades is Bards get a benefit to rolling on everything that they're not proficient in, which is kind of funny. Bards also get a ton of skills, so it's kind of weird, Jack of all trades. It makes it so your Bards are capable of doing anything, even when you haven't specialized into that. This has been pretty bad for me in general in the game systems, like the PC game systems, because in general, the PC game systems seem to limit the number of rolls you can do based on who's proficient in that skill. I'll be really curious to see how that interacts in Baldur's Gate 3. Do I need to be, if we walk into a room and some guy tells us something and we're trying to insight check to get a sense of whether or not this guy is lying to us or what he's saying, and the Bard is not proficient in insight, but has Jack of all trades, does everyone who's proficient on insight and Jack of all trades characters roll on that? Or is it just my top character who's proficient in insight with the best wisdom stat? I don't know yet. So we'll have to see how this particular game system handles that. But sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not a very powerful skill at all. Expertise is awesome. This is double your proficiency bonus in a skill, so you go skilled and expertise in that. This allows specialization. Bards and rogues are the only ones who inherently get expertise, although there's some other ways in the D&D systems generally to get this advantage. But that makes makes bards and rogues very good at specific skills that you specialize them into. And then later on, the Bardic Inspiration dice become short rest resource pools and get a bigger modifier as opposed to the long rest pool that they start with. Bards tend to be a long rest class, especially starting. They have full spell progression and spell slots only are recovered on long rest without some other class feature to do that. And our inspiration starts as a long rest feature as well. Yeah, so that's the base kind of Bard chassis. Let's take a look at what subclasses they've given us access to and to see what we're really going to be getting from that. So College of Lore is the kind of premier bard spellcaster generally. In Baldur's Gate 3, what it looks like they're doing for us, it's giving us proficiency in Arcana, Intimidation, and Sleight of Hand. That is an int, a charisma, and a dex skill. You don't tend to see bards going int very much. Their spellcasting is based off of charisma. So Arcana feature is not necessarily that exciting as a proficiency. It will help with like IDing spells if you run like a counterspell bard, and College of Lore will get access to counterspell through magical secrets at level 6, assuming that it sticks to the regular D&D progression, which allows the bard to take spells from anyone else's spell pool. Generally, bard spells are kind of interesting, but they don't have the full access to everything like a wizard does, and they have the spell progression of a sorcerer, which is each level they can gain a new spell or remove an old spell to gain 2 new spells for that round kind of deal. And these spells are always prepared for the bard, but you don't have the flexibility of preparation like you might in like a druid or a wizard, for example. So I'm not really that convinced that proficiencies, like free proficiencies, are very good on the bard. Again, they seem to get a lot through their class feature, and with Jack of all trades, they already have a lot of ways to interact with skills if we need it. So this doesn't seem particularly good to me going into it. And Cutting Words is basically allowing you to use your bardic inspiration die as an offensive ability as well, debuffing enemies. I think these are reactions as cutting words, which is kind of nice. The action economy in D&D is a action, a bonus action, and a reaction on 1 reaction per round. No class is guaranteed to get all of these actions available to them unless you have specific ways to interact with that. So having specialties of your class or subclass that allow you to utilize all of these mean your characters can do more things per round and are more powerful with that. So it's kind of nice that if these are reactions still in Baldur's Gate 3, it's something else the bard can do with their reaction action that will make them more powerful than they might be if not taking this. In other words, it's kind of decent. It doesn't actually say that we're getting magical secrets on this. This is only up until level 3 for the subclass. But my expectation is the lore subclass of bard is going to be your standard kind of backline caster bard, very squishy, only able to wear light armor, can't wear shields, wants to stay out of harm's way or suffer the penalty of getting beaten down all the time. But on the flip side, very good at casting and a decent support character for your team. We'll have to see what their future subclass features are as they reveal those for their version of the lore bard. The second subclass of bard they're offering us is the Valor Bard. This is as close to a tank bard as you're going to get. It is a melee bard. Giving you medium armor proficiency and the access to shields, which the bard doesn't start with, as well as proficiency with all martial weapons, which means you're, instead of this limited list at the bottom here, the simple weapons and hand crossbows, longswords, rapiers, and short swords, you can use anything. Still pretty rare to see strength-based bards, and medium armor doesn't necessarily push you into strength at all. Medium armor is decent as a like medium range dex or basically a character with medium amounts of dex who's going to be using medium armor here. This subclass is kind of unexciting to me. The bard is a d8 HP dice as opposed to a d10 or a d12 of like a fighter or barbarian. So not the worst, but not the best HP progression. They don't have access at base to the shield spell. So they're pretty squishy. Their armor class never gets particularly exciting, and medium armor tends to end up with okay, but not exceptionally high armor class. Getting access to a shield, like the physical shield, as opposed to the shield spell, is certainly going to be helpful. But when the bard fills both of their hands, so when they're wearing a weapon and a shield, they lose access to some of the spells that requires a hand free to cast. So my suspicion is the College of Valor is weaker than it even looks on paper, because you're going to block some of the spells that you want access to. You're still not really much of a frontliner. You don't have anything particularly exceptionally good about dealing damage with a melee weapon. This seems to fulfill the fantasy a little bit of the caster who's also good in melee combat, but I don't see a lot here that's really pulling me into this. The other thing about the bard that's probably worth mentioning here is I'm expecting the subclass features of the bard to be a little bit weaker than the subclass features of, for example, the barbarian or other melee classes, because the full caster progression, where they get additional spells, does it actually show me here? Yeah. Additional spell progression at full caster rate tends to be itemized kind of heavily in this game. It costs a lot to do that. You give up a lot of other things on your character to get full spell progression. And the bard is a full spell progression class. So the subclasses tend to be a little bit weaker in my mind most of the time with that. So not really digging the College of Valor based on this initial look, but we'll see what else they offer. And the College of Swords is maybe a more believable melee bard to me. A couple things listed here. So what does it do? It gives you access to medium armor, but not shields. Gives you access to the scimitar, but not all weapon types. Gives you a fighting style, but it's restricted to either dueling, which is one weapon, but nothing in your offhand, or two weapon fighting, where you're dual wielding weapons, each with some slightly different bonuses, but essentially damage or survivability, a little bit of that for these two. I think dueling is directly damage, but I can't remember if there's also the AC thing. I think it's just damage. I think it's just basically damage with dueling or multiple weapons. And then you get a series of what are basically combat maneuvers that you can, instead of using your Bardic Inspiration to buff the team, you can use your Bardic Inspiration to do more damage and get more AC, or to, what is this? Cause a weapon deal extra damage to target you hit and any other creature of your choice. So you can do AoE damage, or you can do deal extra damage to target you hit, push the enemy up to 5 feet. So basically small combat maneuvers with your Bardic Inspiration dice. And then listed here, but not listed on the College of Valor page, is a second attack at level 6, which is slightly slower than pure melee progression, which normally gets their second attack at level 5. But at least here, if you're trying to do damage as a frontline bard, you will get your second auto attack off your weapon attacks. Again, I think this runs a lot of the problems. If you are dueling, you will be able to do your spell casting in a way that you wouldn't be able to if you had a weapon and a shield. And there are feats later on in the game, like Warcaster, that can allow you to ignore the requirement of, I think it's Warcaster anyways, which allows you to ignore the requirement of needing either to have a hand free, or you can still have things in your hands and cast these spells kind of deal. So there are ways to fix this. But this is a melee damage dealing bard, a tank bard on the College of Valor, and the pure caster bard on the College of Lore. I think both the melee variants are going to be a little bit worse than the College of Lore stuff, but it's something different you can do with the bard. And bards are a very fun class to have on the team. They bring a lot to the table. High number of proficiencies, expertise in the skills you need it, extra healing on rests, full caster. The inspiration die are pretty flexible, and they tend to, since their spellcasting trait is charisma, they tend to be very good at talking. They tend to be your party face who are doing these social interactions, be that intimidation or persuasion or deception or whatever it happens to be. So I really like bards by and large. They're a very flexible caster support class, but I don't particularly like melee bards by and large. It seems to play to all the weaknesses of the class to me. So of these, I think College of Swords is a more interesting melee bard than the College of Valor. I really don't believe in a tank bard that much, but neither of these look particularly inspiring to me for what they're doing here. So we'll have to see what the future subclass options are for these subclasses. But my initial look at these are pretty underwhelmed by the College of Valor and Swords. And the College of Lore is a very generic, very old bard class, but quite a good one. So a little bit more excited about College of Lore than these other two. But looking at this, it's not very exciting for at least the unmulti-classed bard. Maybe some class features will allow your melee stuff to be a little bit better. Sometimes multi-speccing into a point of fighter gives you access to another fighting style, gives you access to heavy armor, gives you access to con saves if you do it first, this type of thing. Maybe there's some multi-spec builds with some interesting subclasses that make these melee bards better. But my initial thoughts on these are not super good for the bard subclasses.